Good evening. Welcome. Are you there, Kev? You good?
Yep.
All right. I think we're ready to get started. Good evening and welcome to the October edition of Storytellers New Haven. I'm Karen Dubois Walton, here with Kevin Walton, and we are the proud co-founders of Storytellers New Haven. So happy to welcome you to our October session. We are going strong with something that we started in November of 2017, and we have been going ever since, bringing you monthly stories from members of our New Haven community, people who live in, work in, and love, or in some way connected to our wonderful city of New Haven. This has been a real pleasure to create this space that's meant for community building, a space where we can begin to see each other through story, hearing bits that connect us, bits that make us say, wow, I didn't know that about that person, or isn't this wonderful what I'm learning and how I'm connecting to that? Things that can really build our community. We like to say that there are 130,000 people in New Haven, and we want to get a chance to hear each one of those 130,000 stories. So we're doing that month by month with bringing you 2 storytellers each month. Did I miss anything, Cap?
No, I think you're right on track, just like we rehearsed.
All right, perfect. We usually, prior to the pandemic, would meet in person, and we would get together at CONCAT, which is an amazing community organization that we always like to shout out, because even though we're not there in person, they're still very much a partner for us. CONCAT is led by Eric Clemens, and it is a workforce development and cultural center in our community, offering after-school programming and adult workforce programs. Usually we are in their Orchid Cafe, getting treated to things that are produced by their culinary students. Although we're not able to be with them in person yet, we do encourage you to visit them and patronize them, as they have been able to reopen during the pandemic. So stop by for breakfast or lunch at 4 Science Park in New Haven. We're able to do this, and we were introduced to storytelling as a tool for leadership development and community building through the support of Bill Graustein and the Graustein Memorial Fund. Bill's community leadership program, with which both Kevin and I had an opportunity to participate in, is a wonderful way of using story to build community and to support leadership. And we loved it and continue to use story in different ways, and appreciate Bill for his support of Storytellers New Haven, which has continued to allow us to engage in story in this way and bring this to you each month. And of course, we want to thank our technical support, which is brought to us by Rev Kev, Kevin Ewing, and his team at Baobab Tree Studios. As always, we thank you, Rev Kev, for your support. So this month, we're going to bring you 2 tellers that are coming back to the stage. The beauty of Storytellers New Haven is we have an open invitation. You don't have to be an established storyteller. You don't have to be an expert storyteller. You can just have a desire to want to join with us in this movement of building community. And sometimes some of our tellers are first-time tellers. Some of our tellers have told in our seat before and raised their hand and say they'd be interested and willing to tell again. So we have a real treat for you tonight, and you're getting to hear some tellers who've been with us in the past. So I'm excited about that. Our format is the same every month. We open up an opportunity for you to hear a story that will last about 15 or 20 minutes from a teller. After that, we'll get to ask the teller a few questions. So please take a moment to use our chat box. You're following us on YouTube right now. There's a chat feature on YouTube. If you drop your question in YouTube chat, we'll see it, and we'll be able to pose it to the teller after she finishes her story. We'll then turn to our second teller. Again, a story of about 15 or 20 minutes. And then if you got questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll ask our second teller those questions as well. Think about what you want to learn more about as you're hearing the story, and be ready to ask some questions. And while I mention YouTube, all of our stories are posted on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Storytellers New Haven on Facebook. You can visit our YouTube channel and go back and take a look at some of the wonderful stories that have been brought to us over the years that we've been able to convene this space. You will not be disappointed by the wonderful stories you'll hear from Storytellers New Haven. So I think I covered all our housekeeping matters. Is that right, Kev?
Yes, right on track.
So let me go ahead and turn it over to you and introduce us to our first teller for the evening.
All right, great. Thank you. And good evening, everyone. So we are excited tonight, as Karen said, to have two returners. And neither of these women need introduction, but to be fair to them, we will do that for them. So our first teller is the fabulous and wonderful publisher of the Inner City News, Babz Rawls. She's a certified spiritual director with a growing practice under her ministry, Path Illuming. She's a co-online editor, content curator of Justice Imperative blog. She's a popular on-air radio personality on Connecticut's oldest African-American affairs radio program, The Electric Drum, WYBC 94.3 Yale Broadcasting, as well as her own successfully produced internet radio show, Love Babz, Love Talk. Babz, you might want to go get a glass of wine because it's about 2 pages as introduction.
Oh, just stop.
Babz holds a BS in marketing from historically Black college Barbara Scotia College in North Carolina.
Oh, Lord.
And is a National Urbans Fellow with master's degree in public administration from Baruch College in the University of New York. Babz has been elected to public office twice, serving 2 terms on the New Haven Board of Alders, and has served as a mayoral appointment to the New Haven Board of Police Commissioners. Has served on various local and national boards for music, public governance, social supportive services, and she has just recently been appointed to the Citizens Television Board of Directors. She happily serves as a member of the Common Ground High School Board. Can you believe where she finds?
You know, you can stop at any time.
All right, last thing.
She squeezed us in with that busy schedule. She's doing
and we're happy to have you. A thought leader and expert in personal development and personal crisis recovery, Babz uses her experience to support women entering and exiting the federal prison system. Armed with firsthand knowledge of the hardships and struggles of maneuvering the world with the complications of being labeled a felon, Babz serves on the editorial board for Book Justice Imperative, now Hypermass Incarcerated Hijack, The American Dream, and for the past 5 years has facilitated a monthly support group, Eat, Drink, Divorce, for people in various stages of divorce. So with that, I will stop there and I will turn it over to Babz Rawls. However, I will say that she is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the largest Black Greek women organization in the world. So without further ado, none other than the fabulously wonderful Babz Rawls.
Well, I don't know. Babz only has about 5 minutes for her story now.
I know, right? Thanks,
I'm kidding. Take it away, Babz.
That's a very old bio because I don't do the electric drum anymore. So that's kind of funny that bio is one of the old ones that's floating out there. So it's nice to hear the stuff that I used to do. Thank you for having me back. The last time I was your very first storyteller, me and Eric Clemens, for the very first Storytellers.
You were.
Was it 3 years ago? Really?
Yes,
it seems like yesterday.
I know.
And it was during November, and it was adoption month, so I talked about adoption. But today, what I want to talk about today is something that doesn't get talked about in our community enough. So I grew up adoring my father like a lot of young girls adored their father, and I grew up in a household that was very violent. So I had all these things going on, adoration of my father, violence in the home, violence between my parents, and violence between my father and I. When I was 12 years old, my father started sexually assaulting me. And as a 12-year-old child, in those days, is pretty much like these days now, there was an opportunity to go tell people the way there are opportunities for children to tell now. I tried to, in my very small way, protect myself as best I could, wearing multiple layers of clothing, gym shorts, under dresses, staying out late, coming home late, coming home and bypassing family, anything that would not draw attention to myself or the ire of my father. Those things happened to me under the gaze of adults who, for whatever reasons, did not understand what was happening and did not know how to stop it. That is the part of the story that I know now to be the truth. That even though these things were happening to me, adults around me felt powerless to stop the abuse. So as my father was abusing me, he also allowed people to sexually assault me for money. Meaning I was a kid that was trafficked in New Haven. And this went on from the time I was 12 till the time I was about halfway to 14, so 13 and a half years old. And then it came out. And when it came out, there was no therapeutic attempts. There was no breakup of the family. There was no rallying around services around me. It simply was a matter of, this is happening in our family. It stays in our family. You will grow up and you will get over this and you will move on. And so I lived with that in my spirit. So as this was going on, absolutely there were signs of what was happening to me, but the adults around me were oblivious to those signs or felt as though they could not address those signs. I was constantly wetting the bed for fear. I was angry. I stopped eating. I started drinking. I was like 12, 13, 14. I was drinking heavily, anything and everything that I could get my hands on. I was very angry and volatile as a child. I didn't want to go home. I stayed in the streets. I ran with the wrong crowd. I was heavily promiscuous. And this went on and on and on and on until the intervention happened and my father was left the home. And he left the home and things did not get better for us. Even though my sisters and brothers and I are very close, we still live with the fear of pending violence all the time. I grew up in a home where, watching my father beat my mother, watching my sisters and brothers and I be so terrified that we'd have to climb out of our window and run to neighbors' houses, run to other family members' homes for safety. That is a lot to take in as a child. And my saving grace through all of that was I graduated and I went off to college. And going off to college gave me an opportunity to have some distance between what has happened to me and an opportunity to sort of live a different kind of way. Still with the knowledge of what has happened to me, still with the understanding that I was trafficked, still with the understanding that I was sexually assaulted and abused and exploited as a child. So I did 4 years of college. I suffered terribly and hid that suffering in a way that a lot of people do when they are sexually assaulted. I was promiscuous. I drank a lot. I was the life of the party. I wasn't very truthful about where I was going, who I was seeing. I wasn't very truthful about the things that I was into. And I created situations where I was always at risk for bad things happening. And the turning point came, I guess, after I graduated college and came back to Connecticut. I think the turning point came somewhere in my mid-20s when I just decided, after finding a book called The Courage to Heal, that I wanted to live a different kind of way, that I wanted to have a different kind of experience. So I read this book, Courage to Heal. I must have seen it on Phil Donahue or Oprah or something. And I went and got this book and I read it cover to cover. And what I did was there was a piece in the book that said, write a letter to your abusers, even if it's family members, even if it hurts, even if it's scary. So I wrote to all the adults in my immediate family, aunts and uncles, and I shared with them what has happened. And everyone knew what has happened, but no one addressed it with me as a child. So I wrote these letters to these people, and no one responded. Like no one acknowledged. I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited. I mean, this for 6 months to a year, and no one responded. And I knew people got these letters. I knew my aunts and uncles got this letter with great detail about how I was feeling and what was happening, what had happened. And my uncle, who I adored, had said to me, "Yes, I read the letter. I didn't know what I could do, but you seem to be all right now. Just keep moving forward." And that was the end of the discussion. That was the end of the conversation. And so I knew in those moments that I had to save myself, that I had to be the one to show up as the hero in my own story. I don't know how I figured that out. I just knew that I had to take necessary steps to sort of do that. I had to figure out how to rebuild myself back from that level of brokenness, pain, and just lack of self-worth. So it took me, I'm 57 now. I'm still doing that work. But what came out of that time was a real understanding of figuring out what did I need to be better in my life. You know, the first time that I attempted suicide, I was 17 years old. And like a lot of people who try it, you know, I didn't really have an understanding of how to do it. I took a bunch of pills and a bottle of some cheap whiskey and wrote people and said, "This is it for me. I cannot endure this." I must have been 17 before I went off to college, and going off to college helped turn that around. The second time that I attempted suicide, I must have been about 24, 25. I had already graduated college, and I was trying to make my way in the world. I got a good job, and I was trying to make my way in the world, but I didn't understand what was happening to me. I still couldn't connect the dots with the level of trauma and the psychological effects of that. So I spent the next 10 years trying to figure out how to heal myself. I found a therapist that was expressly committed to working with survivors of sexual assault. The only problem is that this particular therapist had no relationship or understanding of what it meant to work with a Black woman who was sexually assaulted. And so she was not that much help to me. And she tried to sort of point me in directions that could help me. But she didn't really have a care or concern about my well-being. I honestly felt as though she wished that I didn't darken her door. And it's funny because I still see this therapist to this day around town, right? And she knows who I am, and I know who she is. I'm not going to call her out because I don't have any reason to do that. I just know that she was of no help to me in a therapeutic way, but she was a help to me in the sense that it confirmed what I knew, that I must be the savior of myself. And so I started on a path of just doing that. What could I do to have a better existence? How could I not think about killing myself every single day? How can I stop being promiscuous? How could I stop feeling worthless? How could I stop wanting to be destructive? So it took about 10 years after college to sort of walk down that path of telling the truth. And I started figuring out for myself, one, if I walk in truth, if I started telling the truth in all things, that would go a long way with identifying what I was feeling in those moments of anxiety and pain and aloneness, to tell the truth, to call things what they were, to not sugarcoat. If I knew I was in pain, I would say I was in pain and do everything in my power to seek help. The second thing that I learned was that even though it was hard, I must do the very hard things first. I learned that if I did the hard things first, the reward in doing the easy things was in and of itself its own reward. And it allowed me to stop being fearful of the world. That when I decided to do the hard things first, that my life got better. The third thing that I just learned recently was to give what you needed. And so the trauma that I experienced does not go away. I remember I was on a panel a couple of years ago, and someone asked me, how did I survive? And I get this question all the time when I talk about being a kid that was trafficked. People always want to know, how did you survive? And other survivors want to know, how do you survive? And the honest answer is, I haven't survived. I haven't. I don't know how you. I don't know. I guess being alive for some people is the survival, but being alive can't just be the survival. At least I knew that there was more in this world that spoke to the things that I wanted to do, and so I just set myself on a path to sort of live by those three things. I still have challenges. And I'm telling the story, one, because I'm living and breathing, and I'm an older person, and there are people out there who are having a tough time surviving sexual assault, surviving trafficking, and surviving childhood sexual exploitation. And I want people to know that they're not alone, that you can live a beautiful, wonderful life if you surround yourself and get the help that you need to help build the reality that you want. It really is about surrounding yourself with people who can help you. Therapeutic help, friends, family, and resources that help you address what is going around, that is going on with you 24/7. Because it's hard work. For every 2 steps you take forward, there's 20 steps falling backward. And even though at 57, I am reminded often, there are triggers, reminded often of where I come from and what has happened to me. And the thing that I've learned is that I make space for the trauma, and I make space for that pain, and I make space for the past and the history of all those things, so that I am no longer running from these experiences. I am no longer concerned about what would people think about if they knew that I still wake up in the middle of the night because I wet the bed, that I still can't sleep because I'm afraid, or I have a tough time staying in places that I don't know, or somebody's cologne can trigger me and I can't breathe. I make space for all those experiences so that it does not hold me hostage, so that the past does not become the recurring me on the gerbil wheel, that I can enjoy things and love and give and be happy, even with that level of trauma on the left and the right of me. And squarely, I see it and I feel it and I understand it. There is a great value in acceptance of what has happened. I don't run from these things anymore. I try to talk about them in spaces where it is necessary for me to talk about them, so that people don't think that the only way out of this trauma is death. I used to think that. I'm here to tell you that it is not. And I understand for those that cannot pick up and carry on. I understand that I've stood in those spaces more times than I can tell you, and more times than I have time to tell you. But I want this story, what I want you to take away from this story is that it is an ongoing, continuing celebration of being here, that I am here, that I am breathing, and that I get to claim liberation and freedom, even though I know that I always, always have to make space for the trauma and the sexual exploitation that I experienced as a child. I walk in truth, I give what I need, and I do the very hard things first. And that is my part of my story. That's it. So I don't know if anybody, Karen and Kevin want to come back on and ask questions. That's it.
Thank you, Babz. Thank you so much. It's hard to wrap that up with a "that's it" because you offered so much of yourself just now, and I thank you for that. It really makes me, because we're a place about telling story and creating space for story. I'm so interested in your journey to the ability to tell your story, particularly when you told it initially to family members and sort of got no response or didn't get the response you wanted. Sort of what allowed you, or how did you get to a place of being able to talk about it in non-familial settings to other people in your life?
I think because it gave me courage to do it. I started to believe that as long as there was this secret that I was holding on to, or as long as I was so afraid that people knew this about me, that I just was exhausted of the secret. And I just thought if I could just tell it one time, 2 times, 3,000 times, that somehow or other it would light my path. It would free me from being a hostage to a story that I didn't want people to know. It's a very hard thing as a grown woman to say, I wake up in the middle of the night because I couldn't get to the bathroom because I don't know where I am. I wake up in the middle of the night in a home that I create and I don't know where I am. It's hard when you're trying to date somebody. It's equally hard when you are just trying to sort of be an adult and grown up. So I think it just seemed like a way to free myself from a story that I didn't want to be held hostage to.
Yeah. I love you talked about lighting your way, lighting your path, and I know your spiritual guidance work is called Path Illumine.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that. Your journey to being a spiritual advisor, guide.
I've always had a remarkable relationship with God. I've always had this very interactive relationship with God. And I think it's hard for people to understand that, because they think, if you come through, how could God have forsaken you in the moments when you needed God the most? And I never really felt that. I never felt that God forsaken me at any point. I always felt like I left God a lot of times. But I think I can hear the call of God very clearly all the time. And so when I got opportunity to have scholarship to go study at the Mercy Center, I just took it. And it was like one of the best things to sort of sit and to talk about, to study scripture, to study all scriptures of all sacred faiths, to sit with people who want to talk about what I wanted to talk about in faith. It was just thrilling to me. It was just remarkable to me, because these are not conversations that people can have like over cocktails or at dinner, because religion can be polarizing. But to talk about where people notice God in their everyday practical life was something that I could do, and was something that I could do well. I could sit with someone and hear their story of God, and I could direct them and ask them, well, where does God show up in your everyday practical life? And what do you pray for? And ask those real big universal questions about who are you? And if you strip away all the things, all the labels, if I couldn't call myself, Mrs. Ivy, or if I couldn't call myself mom, if I couldn't call myself community person, if I couldn't call myself Black woman, like what underneath that could I be? And so those kinds of questions, I thought surely other people were feeling this way. Surely other people would want to know, about how God moves in and throughout. And so that's really what excited me to sort of walk with other people on their faith journeys and their discovering God in all the small places.
Thank you, Beth. So our YouTube audience is following. There's such beautiful words in here about thanking you for the wisdom you've offered, that you are glorious, very inspiring. But there is a question in here from Tressa that I do have to pose to you, and you know why I have to pose it. The question is, have you ever thought of writing a book? I had to ask that one.
Yes. yes. And yes. I mean, I do have people who I've been approached several times about this story for a lot of reasons. I just think there's so many other stories out there that are worth telling, that have already been told. That my little story, I don't know what good it will do in the world. But yes, the answer to that question is yes.
Absolutely. I have to say, your book could be the courage to heal for someone else, right? The way
yes.
The courage of heal to heal. So thank you so much. Kev, did you have I know I'm dominating all the questions here. Did you have
I'm just here for the ride. It was, I do have one. So Babz, you touched on so many things, and I thank you for your courage and your sharing. And I think you writing a book would help so many people. So I encourage you to do that. You said something, so I'm going to put in a question form. And I thought it was really profound when you said you had to learn how to be the hero in your own story. So the question is, when did you learn that you are the hero in your own story?
I think I first learned it, but didn't believe it before I got married. I learned that I was the hero of my own story, but then when I got married, here comes this wonderful man who accepted me, and who didn't recoil from my story. He was not moved by my story, and when we got married, if I pissed the bed, he would just help me get up and change the sheets. And to me, that was worth everything to me. Like, that was the most amazing thing, that he had that level of acceptance of my trauma, because it was so much that he had to sort of sift through just to be with me. But when I got divorced, but when my story was no longer a story he could carry, and he divorced me, I had to decide once again, who am I if I strip away, if I'm no longer Mrs. Ivy, who am I? And I found myself back in that place again of I'm my own superhero here. Like, I can save myself. I've done it. I can do it again. And so it was being divorced. It was being in all the courts at the same time. I was in divorce court. I was in criminal court. I was in bankruptcy court, and I was in civil court. I was in all the courts of the land. And I realized that in all these courts, I was the common denominator. Like, in every court, it was me. It wasn't me and somebody. It was just me by myself. And I realized I could either lay down and die right now, or I could, put the damn cape on and fight back. And I don't like to use warring language, but I could suit up and show up and say, all right, what do I believe? I believe I'm a walking truth. I'm going to give myself what I need. And I'm going to do the very hard things first. And that's how you be a superhero.
Yeah.
I hear about 3 books already.
Absolutely. She's got the titles, right? It's do the hard things first and give what you need. Babz,
Right.
thank you so much. You, as you said, you kicked this off for us. You are our very first teller. And to come back around for us again has been such a blessing. Thank you so much. And the YouTube audience is joining me also in thanking you.
Thank you. I think
Yes, thank you.
I think this is amazing what y'all are doing. There's so many good stories out there, and thank you for bringing them to us and helping us learn about our neighbors, because it really is the way to learn about our neighbors and to make peace in the world. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Beautiful. All right.
All right.
So now we turn. I'll give it back to you, Kev, for our second teller.
All right. So hold your breath for a minute, because that was very powerful, very deep. But we're gonna keep the show moving right along with our second teller. And as Karen mentioned earlier, she's no stranger to Storytellers New Haven, and she's probably no stranger to our audience. And I promise I will keep it brief, this introduction. Denise Manning Keys is a writer, speaker, and facilitator in the field of social justice, diversity and inclusion, and dismantling racism. In 1997, she founded Dreamcatchers, a training and consulting firm with her nationally recognized team, provided workplace training for corporate, nonprofit, academic, civic, community, healthcare, judicial, and law enforcement environments. She and her staff are heralded for skillfully orchestrating a safe, non-judgmental space for the deep work. A comfortable, safe space is maintained to support work that can be uncomfortable. Companies and individuals have had the hard conversations, challenge recognized norms, and move to change behavior. More than a decade ago, Ms. Keys took a course at Southern Connecticut State University with Donald Davis, Master Storyteller and Circle of Excellence awardee. Yet she only began telling stories publicly in 2019. In that time, she has performed at Storytellers New Haven, Telebration, at the Institute Library, the Clinton Arts Council, Genealogy Story Slam at Cobb Library, Saul Fuse's Songs and Stories, and the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. Immediately, she sort of fit between storytelling and her multi-generational African-American New Englander. Denise believes that sharing and listening to stories of others has the capacity to normalize the inevitable challenges of life and deepen understanding of others. Currently, she serves as director on the board of Connecticut Storytelling Center. She believes, as she paraphrases, in order to serve the people, you have to respect the people. In order to respect the people, you have to know the people. In order to know the people, you have to be open to the discomfort of learning their stories. And she adds, as well as your own. So without further ado, Miss Denise Page Keys.
Welcome.
Can you unmute yourself?
Well, we can't.
How about that? Yeah, thank you. So as I was saying, I think as everyone who just heard Bab's story, that I'm in a space that I'll have to work through. And that space is a space that I often feel when I'm in the presence of Babz. It's a space of just respect and admiration for her strength, for what she gives so joyfully and so generously. The story that I wanted to share tonight is a story about strength. It's ancestral strength. And it's a story that I haven't always known, which is why I'm sharing it. I do want to start with this fact. I don't know if Kevin and Karen are aware, but the first time I ever told story in public was Storytellers New Haven. And it was March 11th. And I happened to know that because I didn't know it at the time. I chose to tell a story about my mother, as I am going to tell tonight. But what I didn't know until the next day was that I told that story on the anniversary of my mother's passing. And tonight happens to be the night before my mother's birthday. So there's some kind of energy going on there that propels me to share her story. I tell her story because she couldn't and she wouldn't. Both those things were true, as you'll hear as I unfold this. So I'm going to do a disclaimer up front. This is a story about 3 different ancestors. I won't finish the story tonight. I know that I won't because I want to be respectful of the time that we have. And so I'll ask you to journey with me as far as makes sense for our tolerance and the time that we have available. So with no further ado, like sassafras. I learned a few years ago while working at the Pequot Museum that the sassafras plant has 3 distinct leaf shapes which grow from one stem. And as far as I know, it's the only indigenous plant that does so. And I was immediately struck by the symbolism and the relevance of that to the ancestry of African Americans. Growing from one stem, Mother Africa, and blossoming leaves of different shapes from different ethnicities and different experiences that crossed our paths and cross-fertilized. Growing up, I got very sketchy details about the ancestry of either of my parents, and I ached to know more. I figured there were some secrets like there are in all families, but I also knew that the lack of information was not willful withholding, but more of a mournful not knowing. There were no aunts and uncles and grandparents sitting at our Sunday or holiday dinner telling us the stories about when your mom or dad was your age. In fact, except on Thanksgiving, there were no aunts, uncles, grandparents sitting at our table at all. And I felt that void. I knew that across this nation, large gatherings of Black family members gathered to tables laden with love and shared story. Not mine. There was no family feud that kept the Keyses, my dad's family, or the Mannings, my mom's family, from gathering. You see, my dad's mother had died in childbirth, and while my grandfather, Nathaniel Keyes, raised him, my dad really experienced the stories of before you were born, the stories often carried by the maternal side of the families. And as my dad, James Ernest Keyes, was also an only child, there were no older siblings to fill in the blanks. My dad, a motherless child. I do remember once asking my grandfather to tell me about my dad as a little boy. Well, you know, your dad was always smart as a whip, he told me, before darkness took over his usually smiling face. No grandmother, no stories. My mother, Dorothy Manning, lost her father to tuberculosis and 6 months later, her mother to breast cancer. She was 7 when she found herself orphaned. She did have siblings, sisters, 1 3 years younger, and 2 so much older they were married and living in their own households at the time of their parents' deaths. Busy with their own families, frivolous thoughts like filling in the family history for their younger orphan siblings never occurred to them. No grandmother, no grandfather, few stories. I lived the void. Until my first child, my daughter, was born in 1977. As I watched my parents with my daughter, I was moved to piece together what I could from the fragments of the family stories I knew. I did know that my mom, Dorothy Manning, and her family lived in New Haven, but she happened to be born in Westerly, Rhode Island, the birthplace of her mom. Her parents, I found out later, were attending the funeral of her mother's brother when my mom decided to make her grand debut. And there was a story that my mom shared many times with me, one of the few stories she shared. Her voice filled with yearning, she told me about the idyllic summers before her parents died. My mom and dad and your Aunt Edwina and I spent most of our summers in Deep River, Connecticut, at my aunt and uncle's house, the Mitchells. She'd continue, you should have seen the blueberries growing on the hillside behind the Victorian home, and the Queen Anne's lace and cattails everywhere. I would pick them and bring them to my mom, who would arrange them in vases throughout the house. And then my mom's eyes would grow misty as she continued. My dad would set his easel up on the lawn and capture all that natural beauty on his canvas. The Connecticut River below us and the gently sloping hills behind us. And as she talked, I could smell the native blueberry slump she described simmering on the stove when she awoke in the cool air of those summer's mornings, safe and loved by her family. Her mood would sometimes shift to one of sadness, and I thought I'd hear a tinge of anger as she lamented the loss of the beautiful porcelain wash basins that were replaced by the matelassé-covered beds in every bedroom, and she'd wonder what their current value might be. Antiques now they are, she would sigh. But even as a child, I knew she was really lamenting the loss and theft of anything that connected her to her childhood. By the time she was 7 or so, the visit stopped with her parents' deaths. She hadn't known much about how the family had come to this place in Deep River. She only knew that it was a great gathering place for her sister's parents and the 3 Mitchells. As the years went on, though, she began to question if they were indeed family or just good friends of her parents. Though she said she could recall the feeling of belongingness, of being family. Another of her favorite remembrances, she would tell me with her eyes dancing, was of the Saturdays spent with her dad in his art studio on State Street in New Haven, helping him paint. Though he was a 1915 graduate of Yale Art School, like many fine arts grads, he made his living painting signs as he waited for his oil and watercolor paintings to be discovered. Then one day in 1970, as my mother stood waiting for a bus in New Haven, she was blindsided by those memories. The New Haven Arena and all the contiguous buildings had been recently demolished, and laying in a huge pile of rubble, her eyes caught a wooden signboard. Manning Signs, it read. The 50-year-old memories flooded her, and she scrambled to the next bus stop to get away from them. When she told me what she had seen, I said, "Wow, is Dad going to pick it up and bring it home?" She looked at me as if I had 2 heads. "No." "Why not?" "It's not ours," she said. Now I looked at her as if she had 2 heads. "It's more ours than the city's," I persisted. "Surely they would let you have it." Biting her lip, she closed the discussion. I can't bear the thought of being told I can't have it. Armed with these few anecdotes and not much more, the sleuthing I began confirmed everything she remembered and filled in some missing pieces. We headed off to Deep River with my directionally challenged mom navigating us perfectly to the front door of her childhood summer place of nearly 50 years before. As we were pulling up, we saw a young white family exiting and loading up the car as if for a weekend getaway. Gone the chance to knock on the door and get any information from its current occupants. I was temporarily disheartened, but decided a little walk around the property couldn't hurt anything. The house was as my mother had described, nestled hillside with a great expanse of land to the side and in front. From the wraparound porch, one looked over the Connecticut River, where my mother remembered scrambling down to the banks to pick the native flora. I stood there where my mother had stood and played as a child. And for the first time, I could feel her as a little girl. And also for the first time, I had a feeling of connection to those who had come before me. Returning to the car, I noticed the couple just across the street sitting in Cape Cod chairs, enjoying a summer beverage. As I debated whether to approach, the ancient-seeming couple beckoned to me with, "Are you a kid of the Mitchells?" Huh? Was I the first Black person to come to this house since whenever? What made them ask that? "My mother," I said. "She used to come here in the summers. She's a niece." "Yes, I see the resemblance in you," they said as I came closer. "Are you in a hurry?" "No." "Then please join us." I motioned to my mom for her and my 1-year-old daughter to come join this couple in their sprawling lawn on Mitchell Lane. Soon after introductions were made and shared remembrances captured, Mr. went in the house and returned with photo albums loaded with pictures of my mother's family. More photos of her family than she herself owned. Some of the people in the photo she had known, many she had never met. Yes, they remembered little Dorothy and her parents and siblings coming to spend much of the summer in the Mitchell house across the street. An artist your dad was, I remember. They shared with us more about our family and told us the story of how John Mitchell came to be a homeowner in Deep River, Connecticut in the 19th century. Now, your uncle's grandfather was from Tennessee, I think it was. And the pastor of the Congregational Church here in town was a conductor in the Underground Railroad. On a visit to Tennessee, he met your ancestor, nodding at my mother, and finding him quite bright, told him he would do well in the North as he had the smarts to support himself once here. Or so the story goes. Reverend told your ancestor to look for an opportunity to steal away, and he gave him the starting info he would need to do so. Our hosts weren't sure of all the details, but they knew that my mother's ancestor secured passage and came right to the church in Deep River. He did indeed find work there, marry, and establish a family. In fact, the plane that's used in his carpentry work is in the museum today in Deep River with the imprint of his hand from the years of working so assiduously. The minister, upon his death, willed the house to this ancestor of my mother's. The family she visited there in the 1920s, John and Teresa Scott Mitchell, they were the grandson and daughter-in-law of this runaway enslaved man, and they were the aunt and uncle of my mother's dad, Edwin William Manning. Well, this visit provided the first of genealogical fullness I was able to give to my mother. That day had begun the unwrapping of her father's heritage, the escaped enslaved side. Encouraged by the success of the Deep River excursion, I continued to piece together information with visits to town halls and libraries. Armed with determination, intuition, and a lot of luck, I uncovered more about my parents' ancestors. Digging around in the archives in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, we held the birth, marriage, and death certificates of my mother's Narragansett ancestors. 2 Narragansett Indians, Peter and Sophronia Noka, gave birth to an Indian child, a Caucasian child, and a colored child. Hair texture and skin color surely determined those guesses posing as official records. This was my mother's maternal lineage, the family that later moved to Westerly, Rhode Island. As for my dad's family, the Keyses, there was one fable, as my older brother and I called it, that my dad told us from time to time. My dad, leaning forward in his leather dad chair, would say, "Now, my dad's grandfather, he was something else. He'd been enslaved and bought his own freedom. They call those enslaved people who bought their own freedom self-purchase. And with his papers in hand, he went to North Carolina. I guess he thought that was north enough," my father's attempt at a joke. "He staked out some land and worked in the farm by day, and as a mason by starlight, he amassed more and more land and became quite wealthy by the standards of the day. In fact, there's land there for every descendant," my dad would conclude. My older brothers, sneaking winks and smirks at one another, listened obediently and disbelievingly. Well, if this was true, how come we had never been there to claim our land? We dismissed it as one of those things families do. You know, make up stories that have us descending from kings and queens and geniuses and superheroes. And you know something, though? Luck sometimes favors even the willfully ignorant and the skeptical. And that would be me. Because many years after I had first heard the Keys family fable, my husband and I attended a wedding of a college friend here in Connecticut, where I got the truth of that story. And I'm going to just fast forward and tell you in short that the truth of that story is, as I mentioned, my maiden name is Keyes, Keyes. And I had been approached many years ago by someone who told me we were related, and they spelled their name Keys. And I told them, no, we're not related. We don't spell our name like that. Well, I discovered at this wedding, due to the seating chart that had the same first names as the family members of my family, my father's family, that indeed we were related. And I was very fortunate that the bride and groom during their wedding trip were going to stop and visit the patriarch of the groom's family. And that was the Keys, the Keys Keys, who lived in South Carolina. And that patriarch told them the story to bring back to me. And the story was that indeed my grandfather's grandfather had been enslaved in South Carolina. And his owner allowed him to do masonry work when he finished in the fields. And he allowed him to keep just a little bit of that money, probably never dreaming that this ancestor would save this money and squirrel it away until he had enough to negotiate buying his own freedom. And just before the Civil War, armed with his emancipation papers, he set out in the woods of South Carolina, the dangerous woods of dangerous animals and slave catchers. And he too took the Underground Railroad because even with the papers, he knew that he was in danger of being captured and resold into slavery. And he did indeed stop in North Carolina and homestead some land and worked again on his farm by day and did mason work by night. And he did indeed acquire much land. And there is land in this town that he founded that he named after himself, Keysville. And as I heard this story, I looked into the eyes of William, who told me, and I knew that we could both see this man with the fire in his eyes, the desire to create a life of freedom. This discovery, this filling of a lifetime void, I owe to a prominently displayed seating chart in the heart of the family that made room for me. Looking at William's eyes, I saw our shared ancestor. I saw Nathaniel, Keys, hoist his sack filled with masonry tools in his blood-earned emancipation papers. And I saw as he marched toward the unknown to build a life for his family, his descendants, a life that was free, with 2 E's, a life for me. I asked William, how did the name change from Keys to Keyes? And the story is that when my ancestor staked his land in North Carolina, he inserted the second E into Keys, Keyes, and he stated he's spelling his name with 2 E's, like free, and that forever the family that was born into freedom would be distinguished by the 2 E's in their name. And as I share these stories with you, the names aren't important. They were lost to me most of my life. But even when I hadn't known their names, nor the incomparable strength of their stories, and their spirit had always sustained me and given me an unshakable pride in myself, my family, and my race. These ancestors planted deep roots against all injustices and staked the claims, and legacy I own and enjoy. Denise Manning Keys, the daughter of a motherless father and an orphaned mother. And like the sassafras plant, 1 stem, 3 distinct leaves, the Rhode Island Narragansett Nokas, the runaway enslaved Tennessean, and the South Carolinian self-purchased free man Nathaniel Keys, born into freedom North Carolinian Keys. And to them I say, Ashe.
Denise, oh my goodness. I mean, what a night of story we are having. You brought us on is such an amazingly beautiful story that that again, right, we ended with Babz saying write a book, and I'm going to start with you saying write the book. Write the book. That was
Thank you.
Cool. And I don't know, Kevin, we got to take a little credit because I didn't know we launched Denise's storytelling career.
Yeah. I wanted to share that with you, that was the very first time I ever told a story in public. Yeah.
So beautiful. So
Thank you.
There's so many nuggets in here that I want to just pick up on. Go ahead, Kevin. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, go ahead. No, I said that's the essence of what we're trying to do, right? But go ahead, Karen.
Oh my goodness, so many nuggets. But this time I'm going to go to our YouTube folks first because Wendy had asked, what was your mom's reaction when you were in Deep River and back at the house?
Oh my God, she was blown away. And you know, and I mentioned that so much luck had to do with this because the fact that these two, I'm telling you, these people were like 100 then. The fact that we went when they were sitting on their lawn and had all that history was just a divine gift. But she was unbelievably grateful and moved beyond. So. Yeah.
Wow, that is so beautiful. All right, so I just wrote down so many amazing things. So first of all, the second E, I'm never going to forget the second E, right? 2 E's like free.
Free.
Just so beautiful. But this sense of that I think so many people of African heritage in this country can relate to, this sense of lost history, and lost family story, and the way in which you've been able to recreate so much of this has been just so beautiful. Have you used any of the tools like Ancestry.com or anything? Have you been putting the stories together?
Yeah, I've done a little of that, and you know, the internet is wonderful. It has unearthed a lot of things, as has the Schomburg Library has sent me information about my maternal grandfathers. So, yeah, they've all been useful. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And as I said, I really had to rely on that because I did not have ancestors except for the one paternal grandfather and who died when I was 16, my dad's father, but there were no grandparents by the time I was born. And so it really was up to having to be creative and resourceful to get the stories. So.
What has it meant for you to have roots, right? To have discover this.
Yeah.
Go from the sense of I'm of a family that's small and doesn't have all that to
Yeah.
discover this history.
It meant, I think, as I said when I saw the Deep River home, just a deep sense of connectedness. And I knew a little more about the New England piece, my mother's family, because we're here.
Yeah.
And but when I got there and heard the runaway slave piece, it was like, yeah, I knew that was there somewhere. And that was really empowering, because that's just a piece of us, a piece of our history that I think we need to own and celebrate and embrace and really understand all of what that meant for us to have been survivors of that piece of history. So,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say, this gentleman on here named Paul has a statement that says, I understand you have an amazing, talented younger brother.
Oh, he must mean Mark.
Gotta love the sibling. Gotta love the sibling. Absolutely. Well, I mean, amazing. Just comments in here. Bravo. This is epic. People just love you. This has been beautiful. Just so much affirmation for you, bringing us on that family journey with you.
Thank you for
so full. This has been an amazing evening of stories, and I thank you for coming back. And you are welcome anytime in our telling chair.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Write that book.
Yeah, I guess I will.
Yes, absolutely.
Babz and I will set up sessions to work together.
There you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Denise.
We do miss being able to be in space with our audience and be able to know who's with us. But we appreciate your participation in the chat and being able to see and get your comments that way. We also do like to say we're not sure. Sometimes we have media who are part of our audience, and we do welcome media and welcome their interest in the work. We do ask that if you're a member of the media and wish to write about any of our teller stories, we do ask that you be in contact with the teller prior to doing so. The story is theirs, and we like to respect that. This, as I've said, has been just a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much. Kev, love that we're doing this. This is always so amazing. We should probably do a reminder for next month. We have 2 more amazing tellers. I'll let you know, but they are returnees as well. So folks that I think you'll be excited to hear from again. And we are together on Monday, November 9th, same time, back at 6:30, streaming until we can be back together in person.
Yeah, and hopefully the world will begin the process of writing itself the next time we're together.
We can hope.
Election day.
Oh, yes, that's right. We'll be post-election, so I'm sure we'll have big stories to tell at that point.
Yes.
Our election day escapades.
Yes.
Okay, absolutely. I'm so used to being in settings where I have to be nonpartisan, but I can actually say, yes, go out, vote, and I hope you vote the way I want you to vote.
Yeah, that was still nonpartisan, but we get the drift.
All right. Very good. I think we're good for tonight, right?
Yes, this was wonderful.
All right. Thank you all. We'll see you in November.
And thank you all in the audience. Thank you. We're always amazed that you continue to come out with us once a month and building community, because we want to build community one story at a time. So thank you to our audience. We couldn't do this without you.
Have a good night.
All right. Good night.